Well, we were instructed to open it up to questions, so there's a microphone over there, or if you can't get to the mic, maybe you can speak loudly, and I will repeat. Or there we go. Yes, go ahead. Okay.
So I'm interested in your idea of a low bar or high bar in the teaching of world religions, particularly at the secondary level. And I'm recalling my own experience in teaching surveys of world religion courses for undergraduates. And who was it at Harvard who told us that if we were to be effective teachers of world religions, each week as we introduced a new religion, our students would want to convert? So there's something, if world religions, if a survey of world religions is taught effectively, it is subversive. Can you really teach it effectively and have this low bar, high bar, and just the facts, ma'am? Isn't there's something kind of beguiling and even a kind of conversion moment if you are an effective teacher?
Yeah, I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, I can see that okay, it's Buddhism week or Buddhism 2 weeks, right? So you try to convey to students, okay, if you become a Buddha, you become omniscient. That's cool. Like, for me, I would like to be omniscient. So all I have to do is to be a Buddha, and then I'm omniscient. So you want to convey that to your students, like, this is really fabulous, right? But then you also want to convey, so Buddhists we think are so peaceful, but they're killing Muslims in Myanmar. And I'm not sure you want to convert. I'm not sure that after you hear the good and the bad side. Houston Smith has written the most popular book about the world's religions, right? It used to be called The Religions of Man. It's now called The World's Religions. In the introduction to that book, he says, I treat here only the positive, the most elevated aspects of each of the religions. That is the kind of book, and that's the kind of course where, yes, each week you want to be that, wow, I get to be Hindu now because Hinduism is so cool. But then I do think part of our responsibility in teaching about religion is to teach about the dark side, to teach about the bad stuff all these religions do. I say in talks I give about the world's religions, I typically say, I do think religion is the greatest force for evil in world history, but I also think it's one of the greatest forces for good in world history. So where does that lead us? Well, it's obviously kind of powerful. We should not ignore it. But maybe I want to make them fall in love with each religion and then hate it, and then maybe fall in love with it again. Maybe that would be my goal.
Sir, incidentally, I entered the Divinity School as a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary in 1952. It's a while ago. But I became president of my university in 1995, and I discovered that they did not have courses in world religion or religious studies. And with a degree in the history of religion, a doctoral degree from Harvard, I didn't think that was right. But I want to just share with you my decision. We have what is now called the College of Public and International Affairs. We also have a College of Liberal Arts or Arts and Sciences. And it was my decision not to put the courses in world religion in arts and sciences. That would be too much like religion as literature. Where I thought religion was especially needed, where it was imperative, was in people who were training to go into corporations worldwide or the United Nations or the State Department or something like that. And so we have put all of our courses in religion in the College of Public and International Affairs. And although I will be 90 this January, once a year, one term a year, I teach a graduate course called the Socio-Religious Impact of Religion, or rather the Socio-Political Impact of Religion on world on world societies, and that's a required course for all of our graduate students. Thank you.
Thank you. What school is that, sir?
That is a school, the University of Bridgeport. When I came,
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
it was an academically and economically challenged school, and it was my job to help to turn it around. I took the job at age 71, and of all the things that I've done, I'm most proud of what we were able to achieve there.
That's great. Thank you.
As I've listened to you talk tonight, I'm thinking of you talking about religion kind of on a macro level, across the world, across cultures and so on. And you also spoke about, say, the more conservative part of the U.S. Or political stream being more religious and be more biblical-centric. There's an organization, I think here in New York, called the Biblical Literacy Project. And they focus on getting the study of the Bible and its influences into the public schools. And as you might think, it does very well through the South. In Texas, they're very popular. But up in Illinois and some of those regions. I guess what I'm curious about as I strung all these things together tonight is the idea of the people that basically dismiss religion as a passing phase. When you read, obviously, the world literature and, you know, allusions to the Bible through, say, Shakespeare and so on, how do they deal with that? Does that become dismissive or something kind of, isn't that quaint that Shakespeare would allude to washing, you know, Lady Macbeth washing her hands? You know, is that a Purell commercial or what are we talking about here? So I would like to know about the intellectual landscape of how one deals with biblical and religious references by people who think that this is passé.
Right. Yeah. That's a great question, I think, and you know, I think the literature question is very pertinent, and I do think, you know, having taught courses on religion and literature and written a little bit about it in the past, that for all the reasons you give, it's very hard to understand or appreciate many of the great literary texts that we have without some kind of semi-sophisticated religious understanding of where these allusions, you know, come from and how to think about them. I don't myself see any inexorable slope down in the literature that's being produced, that religion is being excised from it. We put on an event last year at the Divinity School that Toni Morrison came and spoke about goodness and the literary imagination. And we packed Sanders Theatre, and she spoke brilliantly about religion in her novels. So there may be forms of literary criticism out there and people in literature departments who are not very well informed about the literary, about the religious themes in novels. But I don't think that is either a defensible position or the dominant position in the academy, nor should it be.
And I do think it's useful to think about religious literacy as a civic good, which is what my writing has mostly focused on, where as citizens of the United States, those of us who are, you know, we need religious literacy to understand our domestic politics and to understand how our country might act well in the world. But I think there's other ways to think about it. And one of the most obvious is inside religious communities. Mm-hmm. So religious literacy inside, you know, Jewish literacy that's going to help produce another generation of Jews, biblical literacy to help produce another generation of evangelicals. There's crisis, and all these communities understand the crisis that they're in. Catholic illiteracy, that's another way of thinking about this. And then the one you pointed to, I think of as a third type, which is, religious literacy for the liberal arts. Just go to a museum that has any pictures before 1950, and that's in Europe or the United States, and most of them are biblical. And so you sort of like, who's got the apple? Why is the apple in the picture? Why is that guy up? That guy looks to be in pain. What's going on with him? You need to have some biblical literacy just to understand the history of Western art. And similarly, to understand, you go to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, you go to the Asian Art Wing, you're not going to make heads or tails of any of those sculptures if you don't know something about Hinduism and Buddhism. So I think those are arenas where religious literacy is important, and it's not just in the the public space we've been mostly talking about. There's these other vectors that affect it. Hi.
Hi. If I am understanding correctly, you would both characterize yourselves as historians rather than theologians. But obviously you've had...
Other people might not say it that way, but we do, yes.
Well, that's the way I heard it.
No one's ever
Correct me if
mistaken
I'm
me
wrong.
for a theologian.
But both of you have obviously had lots of exposure to theologians of all of the major religions and maybe lots of other stripes of religious belief as well. And I'm curious if you have a sense of their perspective. Where do they come from on the issues that you're wrestling with? It's just something I know nothing about, and my curiosity got the better of me.
That's a great question.
You're the one who runs a theological school.
I think run would be too strong a word.
Herds, cats, apps.
This is Harvard we're talking about. That's a great question. What came to mind when you asked it was one of my colleagues who has just retired, who everyone in the room I'm sure will know, Harvey Cox, who is celebrating the 50th anniversary of his book, The Secular City. And Harvey wrote that book convinced that secularization was indeed deeply operational, and that it was operating in cities primarily. And the theologians needed to think about how to construct a new theology for a secular city, a kind of secular theology for a new world. Now, not that many years after that, Harvey stepped out of Harvard Square and went to a Pentecostal church and discovered that there were different things happening in the world, and there was this phenomenon called global Pentecostalism that was sweeping, and so he wrote about that, in a very different way. So theologians, a bit like historians and public policy activists and so on, sometimes can go along with the tide of the intellectual current and frame their theology around those tides. Sometimes those tides reverse or go in unexpected directions, and people have to think again. So I think that's what I see in the way people write about theology now. One mild concern I have as someone who runs a divinity school or sits atop or around is that in many of these areas, a kind of discourse can emerge which becomes almost unintelligible to people outside divinity schools. And I think that's a bad thing. There's a kind of disciplinary discourse language which is deeply separating the things that we're doing in the academy from the general public. I think, when Steve spoke about the liberal arts earlier, I do think one of the reasons why the humanities are in deep crisis now in the United States. I mean, you look at the New York Times piece recently on the number of humanities enrollees at Stanford, or elite universities right across. They're shrinking, and And one of the reasons for that, I think, is not just that, that smart undergraduates want to get careers and, go off to economics and so on. But one of the reasons, I think, is that the humanities have really shot themselves in the foot by constructing discourses that almost no one can understand. And I think that is a real problem. So anyway, that's a long ranting answer to a very
No,
succinct
but
question.
it's important to note that that's not a problem exclusive to theologians, right?
Yeah,
And that's a problem
exactly.
that historians have, literary critics, right?
Yeah.
Anthropologists, like all these fields, are talking to one another rather than
Right.
talking to a general audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi there. First of all, thank you, gentlemen. This was really a pleasure. This was my first exposure to the two of you, and I buy your thesis, hook, line, and sinker. And I guess the thing, as I sit here, I guess maybe in 2013, heading into 2014, you wrote your book in 2007. The world's really changing, and we're going to quickly move into a world where more people will take a course online in a day than will go through Harvard Business School in a decade. That's the world we're moving into. And the course that you're talking about, which is never going to get into Harvard potentially, and never going to get into the school system, could be online for free, reaching millions of people and making a huge difference in the world, which I believe is needed. So I guess the question I asked to both you gentlemen is, are you thinking about taking this course and putting it online and making it available? And if you're not, because you can't, have you thought about empowering some of your students who are not maybe stuck in a professor tenure situation and can't break the political mode, to let them put it out into the world?
Yeah, that's great. And I think this is something that I'm sure David, I don't want to speak for David, but we think about all the time, right, is education. The education that I mostly do at Boston University is a very old technology. I mean, my technology is conversation. So I stand in a room with students and we talk with each other. And I don't show pictures in my class. And I don't show videos in my class. We have conversations. Now, that I see as a super hip retro thing to do. You can see it as very old-fashioned, but I see it as countercultural. So I believe in that technology. That said, a group of us was talking this afternoon. What are the ways to most effectively do religious literacy? And I'm a big fan of the Khan Academy. You probably know Khan Academy, right?
That's exactly what I was thinking this should be.
Yeah, I mean, Khan Academy is amazing, and it's wonderful. And he started out, I think when he started out, YouTube, you could only do 10 or 12 minutes. So he sort of, the constraints of that technology produced a genre of, okay, I'm going to teach you a certain piece of calculus. I'm going to teach you, say, negative numbers in 10 minutes. And it's his technology is also, it's very low tech. He has a screen that he writes with colored chalk on, essentially. It's essentially a blackboard he's using, but it's an iPad. I would love to do that. I would love to do that. I just need the time to do it, and I need some technological help to do it. But if you want to talk to me afterwards about how you and I can make that happen, I'd be happy to figure it out. I mean, I think I agree with you. I really agree with you. And this is a way. I don't think this religious literacy problem is solely an American problem. This is a global problem. If you could produce 10, 12-minute videos that were about, basic intro to Islam, basic intro to Buddhism, I think there'd actually be a huge demand for that, and bigger than for these massive online courses that are proliferating now, which are a little bit in a state of excitement and crisis at the same time. What are these courses really doing? But these shorter versions, like on the Khan Academy model, I think could be really effective for doing precisely what David and I are talking about. I don't know if you must think about this too.
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously we are thinking about this all the time, and we're just launching our first massive open access online course in the spring, and these will undoubtedly grow. A bit like Steve, I think I've kind of slightly mixed feelings here. I in a previous life was in the UK, was involved in the early work of the Open University, which was going to completely revolutionize and change higher education through distance learning. Through there, it was television programs, and we all made and sometimes radio. So we made our radio and television programs, and people did these courses. It did not change the shape of British higher education the way people thought it would. There's still room left for what Steve has talked about. The kind of on-campus, conversational, Socratic, dialogical shaping of people's minds and thoughts through those kind of things. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. So there's going to be these two things happening, I think, in education. I'm a little nervous about having all religious education done through these technologically delivered courses, unless there's proper account taken of some kind of interactive, and I know flipped classrooms can do this and so on, but that it's not just a kind of, it's not like, you're not just trying to get across mathematic ideas that people can get to a certain kind of competency. There's something more important at stake in thinking about religion and the interactions between people of different faith traditions. Somewhere like a divinity school at Harvard, where we've got 40 plus faith traditions among our students. There's something going on among that constituency that would be difficult to reproduce merely through technologically delivered courses.
Let me just say one more thing about this, lest I sound like a total Luddite. I do believe, I was deeply involved in a 6-hour PBS program called God in America that tried to do the history of religion in America in that, in the television medium, and I thought that was very effective. Mm-hmm. And I was proud to be associated with that. And I've been involved with the Smithsonian in trying to get their exhibitions at the National Museum of American History. This is also a way to try to do what I do vis-a-vis the public. And for those of you who are on Twitter, I did do a Twitter course of the world's religions where each world religion got 140 characters, and that's all it got. And so I did think through, how do you describe Buddhism in one tweet? How do you describe Hinduism? Wow. And if you go to my Twitter feed, you can find that. So these are we're experimenting with ways to try to reach people in this new age.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. Dean Hempton. I'm a graduate of the program in religion and secondary education at Harvard Divinity School, which now does not exist. So are there any RPRSE graduates here? No? Oh, well, anyway. It was a great program because I've thought about this issue for my entire career. And frankly, that degree was hard to pitch to become a public school teacher for many of the issues that you raised. All right, so I'm not saying revive the program, but one of the issues that I would like to share with Stephen is a suggestion for your next book, because I think the scriptures of the world's religions are critical to study because people obviously interact with them. But within those scriptures and then the larger body of commentary on scripture, there must be, in each tradition, views on how to view the other guy, right? So if you had a text or a book on how this within the scriptures of Buddhism and Christianity and Islam, you could highlight or bring that out. I think that would be extraordinarily interesting. Frankly, forget about doing religion except as a senior elective in public school. I think Dr. C. Alan Russell of Boston University, who was my advisor,
My predecessor.
yes, and he gave me a story that he tried to offer to teach a course in Lexington, Massachusetts, free of charge, just on the history of religion in Concord and Lexington, and it was a hullabaloo, and they said no. So if you can't do it there as a historian, good luck. Okay, Dean. I also teach part-time for the University of Phoenix, World Religions, Eastern Traditions, and I would like to challenge your concept that there isn't interactivity in terms of discussions online. I think there's a unique type of interactivity, and that there's, depending on the facilitation skills of the instructor,
Sure.
and you frame certain rules of the road, so to speak, that it's just it's a different experience. Although I do love conversation. Okay, and then one more question, because somehow I made my way to government, and I would say here's another suggestion for getting people to know the relevance of religion. Since I work for Health and Human Services now, it's really on the cultural competence area. So there is religious literacy going on, ferreting on the ground. It's in social workers and doctors and hospitals who deal with refugees and different immigrant groups making very important medical decisions. It's in our mental health system where you've got therapists running to mindfulness training to integrate that into their work. It's on the NIH website, about all the research on meditation and the yoga craze and people getting sort of bits and pieces here and there. So connecting it to health or sex might help. Okay, thank you.
I think we did save that course, by the way, that you took, and actually the Tony Blair Foundation is actually going to run with that course, so it has been saved. We have one other. You want to answer this?
Yeah, let's have
Yes,
this very
please.
quick
Yeah,
question.
real
now.
quick.
It's actually
You've been
about,
standing for a long time.
my
Yeah.
comment's just about secularization. Dean, you spoke about Professor Cox's
Yeah.
The Secular City and then stepping back from that. But it seems that secularism has shot through so much of our conversation here, your conversation here tonight, that there is despite the fact that there is a kind of discourse about the rise or the kind of the persistence of religiosity, particularly in America, there is just a wave of secularization. I'm thinking in particular, so I'm Jewish and happen to be a rabbi, and there's been a lot of conversation recently about the Pew study of the American Jewish community and the rise of the nuns, those who have no religious identity. 1 in 5 American Jews have no religious identity. 30% of millennials have no kind of Jewish religious affiliation, which what I was interested to learn is that it actually mirrors the American population more generally. 1 in 5 Americans have no religious affiliation. 30% of American millennials have no religious affiliation. So I wonder if we are moving back toward an era of secularization, which in a sense demands this religious literacy, but also kind of speaks to that the secularization is not limited to Western European countries and the secular elite in America, but also is more widespread. So.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I probably agree with you actually that I think we are poised on a Robert Putnam's written a lot about this, about the rise of the nuns and about the aftershocks of the 1960s with the rise of a kind of religious right and religiosity that's now running out of steam all over the place. So there's widespread evangelical disenchantment among the students that are coming our way. I've written something about that. So I think you're probably right that is changing. But I think overall that Berger summation that was written probably 7 or 8 years ago now, that the most secular parts of the world are still then Western Europe and American cultural elites was largely true. But I think your observation of where we're going is probably correct, actually.
I'm not so sure it is, because I think the data on the unaffiliated has been pretty widely misinterpreted. Because there's been studies of the unaffiliated does not mean non-religious. Unaffiliated means people who don't want to affiliate with a particular religion. that doesn't mean they're not religious. A lot of those people, if you ask them, is Jesus your Savior and Lord? We have studies on this, of the nuns, what percentage of nuns believe Jesus is their Savior and Lord. It's some depending on the question, the survey, that can be as high as 20 to 35% of the nuns will say Jesus is their Savior and Lord. You know, how often did you go to church within the last week? Often 20, 25% of the nuns will say, yes, I went to church in the last week. Oh, you're unaffiliated. Well, yeah, because I'm not like Christian. You know, I'm not a Catholic. I just go to Catholic church. You know, so the unaffiliated is a different category from atheist, non-believer, non-participant. Unaffiliated does not mean non-participant. I think it has to do with a broader, with a number of things. We agree, we're not monocausal interpreters, but one of the things is young people don't like to affiliate with anything nowadays. If you look at the affiliation rates in political parties, they track the affiliation rates with religion. It's kind of striking. I mean, maybe something else is going on in terms of people not wanting to be, people being skeptical of institutions. Institutional skepticism, that's one thing. And my broad claim here is, one, that's less evidence for secularity than people think, and two, it might well be reversible. One of the main reasons for disaffiliation that I've seen, this comes from social scientists, is that people when they say they're Christian now, because of the success of the religious right, that carries with it a connotation of politically conservative. So a lot of people who in the past, say 20 years ago, would have said on a survey when they're called on the phone, what religion are you? They would have said Christian. Now say none, because they think Christian means you're voting for the Tea Party. And so they're disaffiliating not because of religious reasons, but because of political reasons, because the association between religion and conservative politics has become so close, Christianity and conservative politics has become so close, that they don't want the one with the other. So if there's a way, and this is happening, that Christianity becomes less associated with political conservatism, or for that matter with political liberalism, where it becomes clear that you can be a Christian on either end of the political spectrum, I say some of those disaffiliateds who are disaffiliated for political reasons come back on those surveys and start to call themselves Christians. And then the one other factor, to make this even more long-winded, has to do with marriage rates and when people are getting married. And one classic move that happens in the history of American religion is that students disaffiliate when they go to college. Because when you're in your high school age, you tend to very close affiliation with your parents' religion. It's a very rare person who doesn't have the same religion as their parents. They go off to college. Many of them start to have sex, as you might have heard in college. This happens. And they disaffiliate in part because of the sense of the fact their religion is telling them no and their bodies are telling them yes, and they're choosing yes rather than no. They disaffiliate. This is more of a Christian thing. They disaffiliate, and then the way this story usually plays out is they get married when they're 25 and they have kids when they're 28. They go back to church when they're 28, right? But now they're not getting married until they're 38. They're not having a kid until they're 41. And now that gap, that adolescent space, adolescence is growing, is becoming longer, right? So the adolescent period is the period of disaffiliation, classically. And then the post-adolescence is when you return. So the question is that, the social scientific question is the adolescence going to shrink back? And if it doesn't, if we continue to be adolescents till 38, is that pattern going to stop holding up, right? If you've disaffiliated for 5 years, it's easier to go back. If you've disaffiliated for 20 years, maybe you've become a secular person and you won't go back.
Yeah.
So I think this is all very much up in the air.
Yeah. But I do think, maybe just a couple of things, I mean, very quickly, I think it's an important topic that, I mean, there are a lot of secularization historians saying that once those institutional ties are broken, that the engine of communicating religious knowledge of any kind gets severed, and then it becomes very difficult to reconnect again. So in a way, this generation of people who call themselves spiritual but not religious, or whatever it might happen to be, That might be a transition to something different once those institutions lose their power. And of course, the other thing is just, you know, the intermarriage between religious traditions and what that does to the offspring, which, you know, people are writing about all the time now, that leads to, you know, greater moving out of religious traditions because of no clear generational transmission from parents. So it's a hugely complicated topic, but it'll be interesting to see which way it plays out in the next 10 or 20 years. Sorry. I know you're-
Do I get a question?
No.
So what
Sure.
what if God is in you? What if it's a natural, religion is a natural part of your being? I'll just ask that question. You don't have to answer it. Anyway, let me thank our panelists tonight, David and Stephen, for an incredible conversation, a great, really a great evening. I'm glad that we got this recorded, and I really appreciate you all being here, and thank you for being a patient audience, and many thanks for coming here. Hope this helps the cause of religious literacy and
Thanks,
elevates it
Bruce.
anyway.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
very much. Hey, good job. Thanks so much.